So, Christ as the Logos made flesh, as the way, the truth, the life, adopts the maximum degree of responsibility, and this is crucial to Peterson's psychometaphysic. Is that meaning it comes from the maximal degree of responsibility that's symbolized by Jesus, because Jesus adopts the maximum degree of responsibility of being tortured and humiliated and murdered and crucified for the spiritual betterment of mankind. But the interesting thing about this story, and this is something Slavoj Žižek points out, is that he can hardly bear that suffering. The conditions of human existence are so tragic that even God himself in human form lost faith for a moment in the goodness of being. So the unliftable rock, in a sense, is the redemption of mankind. The answer to the problem of omnipotence and the problem of the fallen world, that there is evil and sin and destruction and death, are intertwined. The story told by the prophets, the message underlying the Hebrew Bible, and for that matter, human history, is that we are partners in creation to forge a world filled with justice and compassion, and that we are the partners with God to the degree that we can retain God's essence of our own free will despite the malevolence and suffering of the world. So, the Peterson's less Jungian model of integrated self, which Peterson talks about in his podcast with Joe Rogan, is that you should learn to be a monster, an absolute monster, that you should be strong, that you shouldn't be weak, you should be strong and forceful, and then you should learn how to control it. So we have this capacity for evil, but we keep it sheathed. The Peterson's definition of the meek is those who keep their swords sheathed, and this is a point from Heather Haying. Alpha males aren't tyrants or brutes as they're kind of popularly conceived of, but they're actually peacemakers. So you have to be strong, you have to be forceful, you have to be an absolute monster, and then you learn how to control it. And Jesus is kind of the prime example of this, because he has this enormous, almost godlike power, but still prays for his enemies and those who persecute him. So you have the capacity for evil, but you keep it sheathed, and you do good in this world, and you do it under the authority of God, and that's the model of the self, and that's the divine symbol of the self in proper relation to God. Essentially, you have to give everything for everyone in order to be everything for everyone. So there's this idea that the voice of conscience is the vicar of Christ, is a substitute for Christ, it's a substitute for God, and that's actually guiding your continual transformation. So the perfect, and every ideal is a judge, so the perfect archetype of what we ought to be is constantly guiding our transformations. Chris Langan says about Jesus that he's a man-shaped gateway to salvation, that you have to mold yourself into that essence, which is calling you forth, and there are analogs of this in other religions as well. So the question, like, what would Jesus do, which came around in the 80s and is kind of a cheeky, American Protestant slogan, but it takes on metaphysical and psychological significance, because it's the same question as what ought I to do if I were the fully actualized version of myself, which is or ought to be, I think, the fundamental question in psychology.